Hello, and welcome to Culture Conversations, the podcast where we explore the people side of work. I'm your host, Megan Robinson. For years, I've found myself deep in discussions about workplace engagement with industry experts. Now I get to share this wisdom with all leaders, new and experienced, on their journeys to build cultures that maximize potential. We spend so much of our lives at work. Let's make it a place where our teams can grow and succeed. Hi, and welcome back to Culture Conversations. I'm Megan Robinson, your host, and I am thrilled to have Traci on our conversation today. Traci and I have some of the best conversations, I think, every single time. There's always something new happening, and it just continues and builds and builds. So much fun, so much laughter. And today we're going to have one of my favorite conversations and talking about the culture of gratitude. Before we get into that, I cannot wait to introduce Traci. Traci Austin is an HR professional, and her career is this captivating story going through transition with her persistent desire to overcome the obstacles. She uses data, she uses insights, she uses background to really bring the expertise level to organizations that are having this incredible gap with their people. And I truly am thrilled at the way that she partners with organizations and teams to understand not only what it is that they're going through and what their needs, but to really coach their team to accelerate the people potential. She always brings the best practices in place, but also the heart and the connection. And I don't know anyone in HR that hasn't gotten involved because they care about people. And that is so beyond transparent when working with Traci and seeing how she leads organization changes. Traci, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. And thank you just for like the laughs every single time we talk, because it is hilarious.
It really is. I love doing these conversations and calling it culture conversations because they really are just those sneak peeks into conversations, no pressure with them, just wanting to hear your perspective and your voice, because something like the culture of gratitude, oh my gosh, like I don't even know where to begin when it comes to gratitude. I will say this to kick it off, and I'm totally going off script with it. What does gratitude mean for you and your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to start with what gratitude means for me. And gratitude is a belief, right? Like I believe everything that happens for me. And even when it is the 50% that's not so fun or the 50% that is really fun, I'm so grateful because guess what? Those rock bottoms or those learning experiences really ensure that I'm learning, that I'm growing, and that I have a perspective of the things that are really good and appreciate it.
Okay, real talk. When all that's happening, are you really grateful in that moment?
Okay, let's look at it this way, right? Like, was I really happy in the middle of my divorce? No. Am I grateful now? Absolutely. Like, are there things where you're like, oh my gosh, what just happened? And then you're like, okay, like what actually happens? Like you jumped on the call today and I'm on the phone with my brother and I'm like, I have another dog this weekend. And yes, I said yes to it, but I forgot he was coming. So now I'm like, oh, think of all the things we can do this weekend, right? And it's like, but it's a lens that you look through, right? Like, it's like Eeyore, everything is gloomy. It's a lens we're looking through. Or I love the fact you're just cracking up over there. Or it's like, we can be like Piglet, who's like, oh my gosh, look at all the fun things we're going to play with. I know you've got a little at home, so I'm bringing in Winnie the Pooh. We could bring in lots of other things. But it's really looking at it. What lens am I going to choose to look through? Even when it's not great, I can feel the ick and know that it's crappy right now. But if I can look at it and say, all right, this is crappy right now, and I'm going to use this, man. Like, I am going to mine the gold out of this situation because otherwise it's not worth the pain that it's creating.
I love so much about that. I love the Eeyore comment because I actually had a client I was coaching who called himself like the Eeyore version of himself because he knew he had that awareness that he was always sad and depressed about it and had to pull himself out of that mindset. Because I think when talking about gratitude, toxic positivity, and this kind of wanting to whitewash everything and assume that it's all going to be happy and we're going to be excited and grateful isn't realistic, nor what happens. when we're
Right.
talking about gratitude. It's so much more, it's that choice. And I look at that emotional intelligence of how do you choose what it is that you want to focus on? Where do you want to put that energy? What does it look like to celebrate and lean into that gratitude instead of not? So I'll go ahead and say, when it comes to culture and organizations, what role do you think that gratitude really plays in shaping those?
Yeah. So I'm going to back up a second before I answer this question to say how I define culture is the behaviors that we allow or don't allow to happen in our organization over and over and over again. So if we think about that, what are the behaviors that we allow and what are the behaviors we don't allow? And I had a director in one of my organizations. It was my first HR manager job. And what he would always say to me was, Traci, you can visit Pity City, but you can't take up residence. And how that links back to gratitude and culture is we're going to choose what we create and what we snowball, so to say. So, it really is about those behaviors. And if we don't like the behaviors that our staff are having or that our leadership is having, then we need to have those conversations to shift it. So, a culture of gratitude is one where we're really showing that appreciation for not only the other, whether it's the client, whether it's our coworker, whether it's our supervisor, but also for ourselves. So often we don't show ourselves gratitude for what we're doing and how much we're growing.
Oh my gosh. I did not expect that. And I absolutely, no, it's incredible because I always focus on that self-leadership first, right? How are you
Right,
leading yourself? And when it comes to having that appreciation for yourself, that is deep work. And oftentimes, if you're not able to do it for yourself, it's even harder to do it for others. And I
right.
see a lot of hesitation, frankly. And I've coached through several people that are hesitant to having that gratitude or that appreciation. But tell me, what is that workplace culture? Because I love that you have the behaviors that you allow and you don't allow. What are the ways that gratitude shows up in the behaviors that you allow or don't allow?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the behaviors is, when you come into a meeting, how do you start that meeting? Right? So often we're starting meetings with here's all the negative things. And most of our clients follow some version of EOS, the entrepreneurial operating system. There's a gazillion versions out there. So there's some version of it. And that one always starts with what's something personal that's important to you. And typically that's a gratitude, right? It's something that's happening that's in your life that's important. And, it's important that we are the whole person at work. And when we can be grateful for who that person is, Megan, you and I were just talking about midnight and 2 a.m. feedings and, like just being grateful that you have that time with your little in a way that can move things forward, even though it's like, oh my gosh, it's so hard at the moment. And that I'm so grateful that you shared that with me because now I can connect with you on a personal level as a mom. Granted, my kids are a lot older. Whereas we wouldn't have that personal connection because now what happens is we build relationships with people based on trust. Well, that trust comes from shared experiences, and now we have a shared experience. And so the gratitude for the sharing within that is important. Um, Another way is, a lot of times I will, I have every single person in the meetings that we start with, tell me a win. What's a win from the last time we met? Every training session I start, every coaching session, tell me a win that's happened since the last time we met. Because what it's doing is it's setting the foundation for what the expectations are. Then we get into all the things that didn't go right, but yet we're anchored in what did go right. So we can go back to, well, what did we learn in our win that we can put into this challenge that we're stepping into right now?
I love how small and it seems innocuous these questions that you're starting things with, or something that you can take to your next meeting of making sure that you have that positivity, that you are finding something to be grateful about, that you are finding those wins, because that's setting, as you said, it's just setting that tone. And
Right.
think about that culture where it's so easy to have that negativity overwhelm it. I think isn't it 7 to 1? You have to have
Yes.
7 positive things in order for one negative to really even it out. If you're not intentional about bringing in that gratitude, bringing in that positive message, it's easy to get overwhelmed.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for those of you watching on video, I'm going to share this right now of like, I'm so grateful that the sun is finally shining here in southern Wisconsin because for so long it was not. And we were like gloomy. However, right now, if you're watching this video, you see the sun like illuminating my throat. And then it's going to illuminate my eyes and I'm going to move to the back of my office here in a minute. And so like, I could be like, oh my gosh, it's so awful that I have this sun shining and it's going to blind me. Or it could be like, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful for the sun and it's showing up in a really funky way right now. We're just going to keep going.
I love the and versus the but. And I feel like that's where a lot of time, and those are just some of the small language nuances that I know I coach and train on a lot, is that instead of saying the no's or the but this, like I love my kids, but they're so noisy.
Yeah,
Everything else that comes before that but doesn't come. Doesn't.
exactly.
And the same thing
Exactly.
happens with this, right? I'm loving the sunshine and it's going to be in my face. Like you're still keeping
And
like
I'm
you're
gonna
still
like
saying you
get
love
right
me.
up in the
I'm like, I'm getting there with you. We're just both gonna have our foreheads on camera soon. I love it. So thinking about the workplace culture and thinking of what's really fostering how you're having the permissions that you allow and that you don't allow, what are some of the tactical things that people can do to really start creating this gratitude or this mindset or this approach to accept? I think it's a practice just as much as it's a mindset because you need to get in the habit of it. So how do you
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, some of those kind of habits for me, I mean, you're a coach, I'm a coach, we both coach, right? And I mean, for me, one of the things that I had to do for so long is I literally would end every single day and I had it in my calendar for 15 minutes. What are three things you're grateful for today? And it would be so hard. Well, I didn't finish these 72 things. And so much of it is catching yourself in that negative to say, well, but what am I grateful for? So if I walk out of my office with 72 things to do today, I am so grateful for the abundance on my calendar and the client work that I have. Because guess what? I wouldn't have 72 things to do if I didn't have the amazing clients that I have. you know and so, but that practice is the practice at the beginning of every meeting is a practice, the practice at the end of every day of what are three wins that I had today. And notice in a work setting I call them wins versus gratitudes, and so there is something incredibly real about knowing your audience and who you're talking to. Am I going to walk into a male dominated C-suite office and say, let's talk about our gratitudes? No, I'm going to walk in and say, hey, what are three wins that you had that were important for you to meet your, to meet your P&L for this month, to meet your people goals, to meet, the expansion goals that you have. I'm going to reframe that in a win versus a gratitude. So knowing our audience and speaking into what that audience aligns with is incredibly important.
What about, and I'm thinking specifically, I actually had a C-suite team that I challenged them. They had a tiny pulse survey and they gave raves or boosts to people and they had an entire culture that was devoid of gratitude. They had no ability to have any sort of appreciation, share any of those wins. It was always on to the next thing. And I challenged them once. I said, great, your challenge this week is to have five boosts. It does not take that much to just find something to give someone a little boost for. Do you know how many they got?
Hmm.
Two.
Okay.
Two. They could
It's
not do more than two. I love that you're already like positive, like two's great, two's a start. I'm like, come on, guys, let's get more than two.
and there's something interesting with this too. I'm going to go off track for a second, but it's like, I'm like, where's my whiteboard? Um, like if you think about a ladder, so I'm going to use my hands. But if you think about a ladder and we've got steps on a ladder where the rungs are super close, I can climb that ladder. If we have got a ladder where the rungs are really far apart, I can't climb that ladder. And I think sometimes our gratitude and our wins have to be to the bite-sized pieces where we're meeting people where they're at. And
Mhm.
because if we see that the goal we made was too big, we've got to shrink the goal to stack the goal, because as adult learners, we have to ground into something that we already know, because we have to see it to believe it. So what's that expander for them that they can see that ties into who they are and what's important that they can emulate because they want that result bad enough.
I love that. I will say I gave a more aggressive goal on purpose to see that they would, because I wanted
I love
something
it.
there so that they
Right.
would be able to see where they were at least try,
Yeah.
see where that commitment was to it. Were they interested? How did they have some of that gap? What did we need to fix when they went through that exercise? What does it look like? So I do want to ask you, because I think this is really hard for people that aren't already in that practice, aren't already in that mindset. What do you say for people that just aren't naturally grateful or having a really hard time struggling getting started with gratitude?
Yeah. So I will ask them what's important to them. So a lot of times when I'm talking within organizations in a C-suite, in a C-suite, that's cute, in a C-suite, can you see why we just laugh the entire time we get together? So especially if I know that I'm talking with a bunch of CFOs, I'm going to bring in the statistics. Like 93% of employees who reported feeling valued said that they're motivated to do their best work. That's from a Forbes article. 88% of employees who reported feeling valued said that they're engaged in their work. Okay. 81% of employees stated that they would be motivated to work harder if their boss expressed gratitude. And that was from a Gallup poll. So I figure out what's important to them. And if they're really heady, like super, super smart, but don't always have the empathy, that's not a bad thing. I just need to meet them where they're at, which is why I like to throw out the statistics that are aligned with that.
Yeah. So I love that that kind of starts to change those minds, right? It might
Right.
melt the hearts a little bit, but changing those minds, and at least the first step, it sounds like, is bringing up the importance of it. Like you
Right.
have to be able to make this a priority for yourself. And I love those are powerful statistics. What are some of the stories of examples you've seen of organizations that have adopted more gratitude into their culture, and how has it changed them?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple, we've got some school districts that we serve. So that's one, and then, manufacturing and construction is another one. And so, I want to tell a story, but I want to give you kind of this recipe that we use, which is recognize, acknowledge, and appreciate. And when we look at, this kind of gratitude recipe of recognize a specific person, experience, or behavior that's meaningful. You want to acknowledge, which means you're describing specifically why you're grateful for that person, experience, or behavior. Then you're appreciating, which is, hey, how did you benefit from it? And the reason why that recipe is so important and why I wanted to name it is we can give platitude gratitudes. Oh my gosh, Megan, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. You're like, okay, I do a podcast every week. Yeah, thanks. But, if I'm like, hey, Megan, I just want you to know I really appreciate how you positioned me to show up as my best self on this podcast, and and how we laughed about the spark to ignite or whatever it was that just cracked me up. So I really appreciate how you brought yourself in to really bring out the best of me based on our questions and our conversation. And that is such a gift because you're allowing another person to be heard and seen in a really valuable way that is not there because you truly provide the presence and the listening to them. And so I just want to thank you for that because that allows me to go back and implement some of those in my podcast.
Oh, thank
And I
you.
mean all of that, by the way, Megan.
No, that wasn't just the fake example you were giving. Thank you,
No,
Traci.
no.
No, and that feels different. That feels
Right.
so different. Thank you for that. That's a wonderful example.
Yeah. And absolutely. And, I started thinking about answering the question you actually asked. So I'm like, that didn't sound authentic. And yeah. And, um, so with that, how we're implementing it is a lot of times it's directly having conversations with the leadership team and having them feel it. Like you feel gratitude differently when you know that it's real.
Yeah.
And so, I have a manufacturing client that I've been working with their leadership team. I've been working with them for several years, but really working with their leadership team on how they see each other and how they see their staff. And here's the deal, when we can truly see our staff as the whole person and thank them for what they're bringing to work and how they're bringing it versus, hey, this is just, a machine operator, we're humanizing each other, which means they're more engaged in work. When we're more engaged in our work, we build trust, and that trust allows us to increase our productivity because we want to be at work now versus having to be at work.
I love that. My quick story, the want tos versus have tos, is my favorite gratitude. I was newly married, I will say, and my mother-in-law started complaining about, oh, I have to go to the store and I have to go get the house cleaned for this party and I have to go pick up my grandkids from school. And I was like, oh, no, 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 Debbie, you get to.
Mhm.
You get to go clean the house for the party you're going to have. You get to go to the grocery store and pick out food. You get to see your grandkids. These are all get tos. And I will say to this day, my husband uses that with his team who's in manufacturing, and they just roll their, oh, no, no, you get to do the dishes. It works in every walk in life.
Oh, it totally does. And then it comes into delegation and leadership. I get to delegate because I've got too much on my plate. So who wants to take it on?
I love it. The gift tos, the versus the have tos, and you hit it right on, especially with finding those easy wins and those things that are connection and most important and balancing the priorities. I'll go
Right.
ahead and wrap things up here because you are just such a wealth of information. I know we could talk about gratitude for a very long time, but what are some final tips that you'd like to say with just sharing that gratitude for an organization and helping that culture?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to give you 5 really quick ways you can implement gratitude. Don't forget our little recipe, recognize, acknowledge, appreciate, right? So you can write a letter or a text of gratitude, and here's something, read it. Even if you never send it, read it because it changes you. And a lot of times the gratitude is about how it changes you much more so than how it changes another. Develop a gratitude ritual to start all meetings, which we talked about at the beginning of our conversation today. End your day with 3 things that went right. The sun's coming in. Start your day with 3 things you're grateful for and then writing them down. A lot of times that's the first thing I do is I put it in the journal on my phone before I even get out of bed because it sets your day up to succeed. And then, show your gratitude. It could be a silly GIF. Did I even say that right?
I
I
say
don't know.
gift, but if you say GIF, that I'm rolling
I
with.
have no idea. Right?
It's a
But
whole thing.
how can you show that to another? Whether it's like a little thing of, a text, a little candy bar at somebody's door, whatever that is, just to show, look, I see you, I hear you, I appreciate you for being human.
Oh. With that, I mean, appreciating someone for being human, that just summarizes everything together because we can all appreciate each other for being human. We all know what that human experience is like. We can all share a little bit more gratitude in that. Thank you so much, Traci, for your brilliance, for your insights. If you would like to connect with Traci, if you're looking for how to bring a little bit more of that gratitude to your organization, to your culture, how you want to elevate your team and your people and bring some of these best practices to your organization, all of Traci's contact information is going to be in the show notes, as well as her company. So Elevated Talent Consulting, you can check them out, find out all their incredible services, what they can bring to your organization, and be sure to listen to Traci's podcast. She has had some incredible speakers on it. I'm actually very excited to chat with her right after this about one of my favorite people, Tina Marie, who she recently interviewed, but she has such amazing content and value to bring. So thank you so much, Traci, for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Culture Conversations. I'm your host, Megan Robinson, founder of eLeader Experience, a professional leadership development company. Today, we shared actionable ideas to navigate the evolving workplace landscape, compete for talent, and build cultures that maximize potential. If you're looking to learn more about how to support your organization's leaders, you can learn more about our work at eleaderexperience.com. Now get out there and contribute positively to your organization's culture with your own conversations.